Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be talking a little bit about NetSuite costing methods and some of the pitfalls that I've learned and picked up over the last several years while I both used and have implemented NetSuite for some of our clients. My name is John Martinez. I have been in the NetSuite world for the last 7 years, both in working with distribution and services, and have worked with a number of clients in the manufacturing space and other services industries. So I'm looking forward to talking about this topic. It's really dear to my heart, and it's always an area that I get a lot of questions on from our clients. My background, I come with about more than 25 years experience in manufacturing and distribution in multiple industries in my career. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. What I'm going to be talking about as I look at the pitfalls of NetSuite is several different costing options and methods that NetSuite offers. We'll talk about a quick overview, some of the basic rules around the costing that you should be aware of, how they work, and then some of the things that drive people to select different cost options. And then throughout the presentation, hopefully I'll throw in a couple of gotchas along the way. First thing to know is not every costing method is available for every item type. Typically, costing methods are associated with an inventory item and or an assembly item, which is an item that is assembly of other items. When you're creating an item in NetSuite, you typically get an option to select either inventory or assembly, and then within that selection, you get the choose between serialized, lot numbered, or neither one of those controls. As you look at selecting a serialized item, this is typically used for items that you want to track serial numbers, that you want to specifically control them coming into the four walls of your organization, and then control them and track them as they leave your operation to your clients. When you select serialize, you have three options available to you from a costing method. One is average, one is standard cost, which allows you to set the cost regardless of what you pay for it. And lastly, a specific cost, which will actually tie a cost tier or cost specific to a particular serial number associated with that item. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The second option is lot numbered, which is the ability to identify an item or a group of items associated with a particular lot number. Average cost, you have the ability to select average cost as well, standard cost, and the lot number cost. Now, lot number cost is slightly different than serialized in that the serialized items have a one-to-one relationship to a specific item. Lot number can have multiple items related to a particular lot, and you can control a cost associated with that lot number. There's nothing in the system that prevents you from using the same lot number for multiple receipts. So when you look at cost tiers can be related to both a lot number and the receipt of that particular lot number. And then if you have multiple lot numbers across multiple receipts, NetSuite uses a FIFO method to actually use to issue lot costs when you ship product. And then the last option is where you don't select either one. You just basically have an inventory item, not serialized, not lot numbered, but you do have additional two options available to you in the costing method. And that it would be FIFO, which is first in, first out, and LIFO, which is last in, first out. And they mean what they mean. The item that you received first will be the first to be issued from a costing perspective, and that means and actually I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the reasons why people pick either one of those options. What's important to understand is that when you've created an item, when you've selected serialized, whether it's serialized standard or specific or average, this is a one-way street. NetSuite will create the item or will create the necessary records to support that particular cost method, and you cannot change it. So if you start down a path with serialized items, but you want to switch over to a different costing methodology, you can do that, but you have to basically create a new SKU. You can rename the old SKU to old SKU, but ultimately you'll lose a lot of that original history associated with that item. So be very aware, and remember that if you want to change, you can change, but you have to create a new item to do that. So some of the basic rules which we just talked about, it cannot be changed once you establish it. There's something, if you do start with a non-inventory item, the NetSuite does allow you to turn it into an inventory item, but once you select the costing method, it's a one-way street. Serial numbers and lot numbers are both required for every transaction that's resulted in an adjusting entry. So when you're doing a receipt of goods or you're doing inventory moves within NetSuite, it does require you to select the serial numbers or lot numbers associated with those items. Just keep that in mind. So how they work. I talked briefly earlier a minute ago about LIFO and FIFO. They both are based on receipt date, and all inventory adjustments are adjusted based on the receipt date. So FIFO is based also on the receipt date. So some of the reasons why people pick FIFO and things to understand about FIFO and LIFO is that the cost when you're processing an invoice or you're processing a fulfillment, is, to be more specific, is when the cost gets assigned to the item. So if you have an open order and you're trying to understand what your margin is on that order, you're really not able to see what FIFO layer that item would be shipped as. So what the system will do, what NetSuite will do, is use the average cost to calculate your margin. Something to keep in mind when you're using FIFO, LIFO, in fact, primarily with FIFO and LIFO, but it also applies to specific and lot controlled items, that your margin may not be completely, it's going to be an estimated margin on open sales orders or open forecasts. So keep that in mind when you're selecting these cost methods, because a lot of people are, trying to figure out what their exact margins are, and you really won't see any of that until the item's been shipped or adjusted out, or however you manage your inventory activity relative to sales. Other methods, average, which is based on inventory positive adjustments. Keep in mind, in fact, I just ran into something similar where someone adjusted out some inventory and they had adjusted out before they had finished a work order, resulted in a $0 event, a $0 adjustment because there was no inventory on hand. Average cost from a negative standpoint doesn't allow you to set the cost. When you're adjusting things out, it uses whatever's there, and if there's no inventory, it tends to default at 0. Sometimes it'll try and fix itself, but generally speaking, it goes out at $0. So it does require you to go back and realign some of these adjustments so that they have a cost when they're adjusted out. All inbound inventory, whether it's a receipt or an inventory adjustment, will positively impact the moving average cost of your items. Standard cost is typically used in manufacturing. A couple of things to note about standard cost is it allows you to set the cost. If you are a manufacturer and you do rolled up, you do a build process and you have your item set up to source through a build, then when you do a standard cost roll up, it will roll up all the costs. And if you're using WIP, it'll roll up your labor costs associated with that particular work, with that particular bill of material and manufacturing work assembly. If you set the method of supply method to purchase, then you will need, it will no longer use the rolled up cost. It will require you to use the standard cost specified at the location detail record of the item. There's a lot of detail here. Again, not again, but if you feel you require more information at any point, feel free to contact us at any point. And then the last option, very similar to average costing, which allows you to do establish and set up a group costing across multiple locations. And this will help a company manage average cost across multiple facilities. So if you're really purchasing from the same location, and you really want to make sure that you're consistent across the board between transfers and other activity between multiple distribution locations, it's a good idea to kind of consider looking at the group average cost method to help at least maintain some consistency and across multiple locations. As we talked about earlier, some of the reasons why FIFO and LIFO are used is to, I guess I didn't mention it before, but one of the reasons is to drive a different behavior relative to what margin expectations you have or how you want to reflect your valuation of on-hand inventory. If you have a declining product, which I think cost of product, which I think most companies have, and there's a scenario certainly where product margins, product costs will go up in nature. In a FIFO world, in a declining, as just an example, in a declining product cost environment, your cost, first in, first out, means that you're going to be much closer to your current cost from a margin standpoint. Your margin is going to be slightly higher in this particular scenario because you'll have already sold your higher cost product that you had previously received in this FIFO model, so you end up with a slightly higher margin on your sales going out. In a LIFO world, in that same kind of model, you're selling the last in, first out, meaning that your margins are going to be, you're always going to be selling the lower cost margins, and your inventory valuation is going to be a lot higher because you're selling your lower cost margins, which are the current ones relative to your sales. So you're going to end up with a higher overall margin basis and a lower inventory cost. Let me go back to the FIFO. In the FIFO, you're always using the oldest margin, and it's going to reflect the oldest margin. So your margin is going to be lower, but your inventory cost is going to be generally lower as well. So it depends on what your objectives are from a reporting, from a tax perspective, and such. Average costing has a leveling effect. It's just a running average, whatever you have on hand. What's important to understand, again, relative to average cost, is that many systems, average cost will get set once, and then they'll continue to use that average cost regardless of the inventory state. With NetSuite specifically, if there is no inventory on hand, then average cost is set to 0. So if you're doing any zero quantity-based activity, it tends to give you a 0 average cost. So keep that in mind. If you're running a negative, if you have a situation where running a lot of negative inventory, that's going to be a factor. Standard costing has the least volatility. You're setting it, and your costs aren't impacting the margins, cost of material, because you're setting that particular standard cost. It does require a little bit more maintenance because you have to run costing tasks to set a cost level within NetSuite. And if you do not set that, you are unable to transact on that item. So we have a high volume of activity of creating items. You have to have a very good process associated with managing that standard cost process, or you end up with a lot of stops in the process. People can't receive product, and everything kind of sits still until someone performs some of these costing steps. So it's more difficult to manage that environment when you have a high volume of new items coming into your operation. Why change? You know what? People get into a costing method. I have one example where someone had a particular item that was serialized. They had average costing, and specifically they lived in an environment, a retail environment, and many times in a retail environment or in a particular supply chain, you have vendors that give you price protection, basically, that allow you to lower your cost. They give you money back to lower your cost. And if you're in a serialized inventory situation with average cost, you can't adjust the cost without taking all the inventory out and putting it back in. The situation with that with serialized items becomes very difficult because, as we talked about earlier, you have to track every serial number going in and out. So this particular client of ours actually, we switched them over to standard cost to allow them to do cost adjustments with standard cost without having to adjust inventory out. They were willing to take on a little bit of the overhead with managing the standard cost to give them the flexibility to adjust their inventory costs when they had price protection, and this helped them to get a better visibility to the margins on sales orders and ultimately the financials from the operating reporting perspective. Volatility of purchase prices, people just change it because they're looking for different items. You may want to go to specific based pricing because you have a lot of volatility and you want to actually use real costs. People use real costs because they want the commissions to be accurate as possible relative to the buy price. If it's a serialized or a lock controlled item, people will, some organizations will drive changes in costing methods to drive more accurate commissions because that's how they pay their salespeople. So there's lots of reasons why people want them shipped. Just again, be aware of the historical issues around demand and the maintenance requirements going forward. I know we've talked a lot, so there's a lot more. We spend a lot of time helping customers understand why costs are a certain way, what we can do to fix them, whether it's a standard cost option or an average cost, or how to create better visibility, something like a FIFO layer or a LIFO layer associated with their current costing methodologies. So I hope you learned something through this process. I don't have any additional slides. Feel free to contact us and ask about our NetSuite administration services, or feel free to email, go onto our website and ask us about some additional questions you may have regarding costing. Thank you for joining us today, and hope you have a wonderful afternoon.